Hey guys, tonight we begin with something a little darker, a time of plagues, punishments, and pottage. We're diving into what life was really like during the Middle Ages. Forget the castles and chivalry Hollywood sold you. The truth, you probably wouldn't last a single day. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Congratulations, you've just woken up in the year 1325. The good news? You're alive. The bad news? So are the fleas. Your bed is a half-rotted straw mattress, stuffed with bugs and hay that smells like a barn floor because it was a barn floor 3 months ago. There's no memory foam, no pillows, and definitely no Egyptian cotton sheets. Just a wool blanket that hasn't been washed since last winter and now weighs roughly as much as a small cow from the accumulated grime. You blink awake as the church bell clangs in the distance. It's the medieval version of an alarm clock, only louder and somehow even less merciful. Your home is a wooden hut with one room, no windows, and a charming open-concept floor plan where your family, livestock, and domestic insects all share the same space. The smell? Oh, it's a fragrant symphony. A subtle blend of stale beer, human sweat, goat, and something you pray isn't mold, but know in your soul probably is. Scented candles haven't been invented. And even if they were, they just melt on your dirt floor. You try to stretch, but immediately regret it because the air is freezing and your joints ache. You're 22 years old, which in medieval terms is roughly middle-aged. Your spine cacks like an old wooden door, and your knees sound like a bag of rocks being shaken by a confused peasant. Getting out of bed is a gamble. The floor is either wet from last night's rain, which leaks through the thatched roof, or crusty from something your neighbor's chicken did. Either way, your bare feet are now part of the ecosystem. Oh, and privacy. What's that? Your entire family and maybe a random cousin who just never left are waking up beside you. There's no bedroom, no curtains, no me time, just communal everything. Welcome to morning in medieval Europe, where you're never truly alone because parasites, rodents, and 8 other people are always with you. And this is just how your day starts. It only gets worse from here. So, you've managed to crawl out of your medieval haystack of horrors. Congrats. Now, nature calls. And it's not calling politely, it's screaming. Here's the part where you start missing the modern bathroom. There's no toilet, no seat, no toilet paper, no flush, not even a mildly resentful plunger in the corner. In the 14th century, relieving yourself is an adventure, a social experiment, and often a small public event. If you're a peasant, your bathroom is likely a wooden bucket behind the house, which is already full because Uncle Wolf Stan had a rough night after eating bad turnips. The smell is biblical. You hold your breath, do your business, and then here's the kicker. Toss it into the street. Yes, the street. You're supposed to shout something like "Gardaloo" before dumping it out the window. That's Old French for watch out below. Although, frankly, no one ever moves fast enough. Streets in medieval towns are open sewers, a charming river of human waste, animal droppings, and mystery liquids you'd rather not examine. If you're lucky enough to live in a town with public latrines, congratulations! You get to sit shoulder to shoulder with strangers in an outhouse where privacy is a myth and ventilation is a cruel joke. You might make small talk, but try not to breathe too deeply. Toilet paper. Never heard of it. Most people wipe with straw, leaves, rags, moss, or if they're feeling especially indulgent, a scrap of wool. Sometimes nothing at all. Which might explain why handshakes weren't popular yet. And if you're in a castle, surely it's better, right? Well, sort of. You might have a guard robe, a hole in the wall that drops your waist directly into the moat. Great idea. Except that your enemies know this. And yes, attackers sometimes climbed in through the waist chute. Talk about entering through the back door. So, whether you're a farmer or a baron, medieval toileting is a humiliation ritual. It's cold, it's public, it's dangerous, and it's never not disgusting. One slip on a wet stone path and you're face first in humanity's leftovers. And you still haven't brushed your teeth, but we'll get to that next. You survived the toilet. You deserve a reward, right? Maybe a nice breakfast. Something warm, delicious, comforting. Sorry, this is medieval Europe. Nothing is comforting here. Breakfast, if you can call it, is a grim affair. There are no eggs, Benedict, no coffee machines sputtering awake, and certainly no avocado toast. You sit down or squat near the fire to a wooden bowl of something that looks like it was scraped off a muddy boot. Welcome to your daily ration of pottage. Pottage is a thick, gloopy stew made of whatever you can find. Grains, root vegetables, maybe a few beans if you're lucky. It's been simmering in the same pot for days, sometimes weeks, and new ingredients are just dumped on top of the old ones. It's less of a recipe and more of an ongoing, edible experiment. On the side, a hunk of bread so hard it could deflect arrows. It's made from coarse rye or barley flour, often bulked up with sawdust, ground up acorns, or other creative ingredients, because wheat is a rich man's fantasy. This loaf is not your friend. You don't slice it, you negotiate with it. What about drinks? You're not sipping orange juice or an oat milk latte. You're drinking beer. Yes, beer. At 6 a.m. Why? Because the water is teeming with parasites and filth. So, you start your day with weak ale, low alcohol, high survivability. Kids drink it too. No one's happy about it, but at least it won't kill you immediately. Want some meat or cheese? Dream on. That's for Sundays and saints' feast days, and only if your lord is feeling generous. Most peasants don't eat meat more than a few times a year. As for fresh fruit, only when it's in season and not already fermented into wine. And don't even think about spices, unless you're royalty. A pinch of pepper costs more than your monthly wages. Salt is valuable enough to be locked away, so you chew your gritty bread, gulp your medieval beer, and try not to think about the rat that may have nibbled your porridge in the night. Breakfast doesn't energize you. It just happens to you. And now that you're properly underfed, it's time to work like your life depends on it, because it absolutely does. So, you've eaten your sad medieval breakfast, and now it's time to get dressed. Not that it'll help. Your wardrobe consists of exactly one outfit. 1. It's a rough wool tunic or linen shift that you've worn every day for months, possibly years. There's no such thing as seasonal fashion. There's just, wear this until it disintegrates or gives you a fungal infection. Underwear, optional. If you're lucky, maybe a linen under tunic. If you're not, well, you're going commando under layers of scratchy, sweaty wool, all lovingly stitched together by someone who probably had no idea what a seam was supposed to look like. There's also no washing machine, no soap, and absolutely no dry cleaner in sight. So, your clothes are stained, stiff, and scented, like a compost pile that's been left to marinate in a pigsty. Even if you wanted to wash them, it's not easy. You'd have to haul water from a river or, well, heat it over a fire, scrub your tunic on a board with ashes or lye, and hang it in the sun, which is out approximately 3 days a year. And don't get me started on shoes. If you own any, they're made of untreated leather, barely stitched together, and offer as much arch support as a banana peel. Most peasants just go barefoot through mud, through dung, through medieval landmines, aka sharp rocks, and disease puddles. All this means one thing: your skin hates you. You itch constantly. Fleas, lice, and bedbugs live rentree on your body. Everyone has them. Nobles, lousy monks, itchy children, walking insect farms. No one escapes. You'll be scratching your armpit with a wooden spoon while chatting with the local priest, and no one will even bat an eye. Your skin is raw from rubbing, your scalp a battlefield of bites, and if you develop a rash, well, too bad. There's no dermatologist, no hydrocortisone, no one to tell you it's probably scabies. You just keep on suffering. And if you're lucky enough to not get an infection, great. That rash will simply accompany you for the next 6 months, like an unwanted medieval sidekick. Now that you're dressed in misery and wrapped in discomfort, it's time to head outside and start working yourself to death. Now that you're fully dressed in itches and damp wool, it's time to flash that morning smile, except you don't. Because in the Middle Ages, smiling is a dangerous game. Not emotionally, dentally. There's no toothbrush, no toothpaste, no mouthwash, no floss. The concept of oral hygiene is about as popular as bathing, which is to say, not very. Some people might chew on a twig or rinse with wine or vinegar, but for the most part, your teeth are on their own, and they're not doing well. By the time you hit your mid-20s, your smile looks like something pulled from a haunted crypt. Cavities are rampant. Gums are swollen, and those aren't just food stains on your teeth, that's decay. You have more rot in your mouth than a medieval root cellar. Sugar, while not yet everywhere, is becoming more common among the rich. Imported at great cost, mostly used in small cakes or to
show off wealth. If you're noble, congratulations, you get to rot your teeth faster than the peasants. If you're poor, you'll do it slowly over time with fermented bread, gritty porridge, and years of hard chewing. Toothaches? Get used to them. They're like medieval weather, always there in the background, the kind of pain that makes you consider praying, drinking, or pulling the tooth out yourself with a pair of pliers. And that's not a joke. That was the actual treatment. Dentists didn't really exist, but barber surgeons did. Yes, the same guy who cuts your hair is also pulling your molars out by candlelight with an iron hook and zero anesthesia. Infected tooth? Hope you like fevers, because without antibiotics, it can easily turn into sepsis and kill you from a toothache. That's right, the same thing that sends us to a pharmacy today could be your funeral in the 1300s. And there's no relief on the social front either. Kissing? Good luck. Halitosis, bad breath, is everywhere. If you're single, you're not judged by your smile, you're judged by your land and your livestock. In short, your mouth is a battlefield, and it's losing the war. Now that your teeth are throbbing, let's head outside, because your real job, the one that will break your back, is just getting started. Time to head to work. Except there's no office, no desk, no coffee break, and no chance of promotion. Your job, if you're like 90% of the population, is simple. Don't die while laboring for someone else's comfort. You're a peasant. Congratulations! That means you work the land that belongs to a lord who probably doesn't remember your name. You rise with the sun and stop only when it disappears behind the trees. Your tools? A wooden hoe, a rusty sickle, and whatever bones are still intact in your body. There's no weekend, there's no clocking out, there's only sunrise to sunset 6 days a week. Sunday is off, but only if you're harvesting, fighting off raiders, or praying feverishly for your infected toe to stop turning black. The work is brutal. Fields are plowed by hand or with oxen if you're rich enough to afford one. You dig ditches, sow seeds, pull weeds, and carry water until your spine begins to resemble the letter S. No one cares if you're tired. No one's asking how your mental health is doing. If you're a woman, surprise, you don't just do field work. You also care for children, clean, cook, spin wool, feed animals, and pretend your husband's lice infestation isn't slowly.
And the worst part? You still have to work. Heat stroke is just called taking a bad turn. So, you're either shivering in your own HVL, wondering if your toes will make it to spring, or you're sweating through your only pair of socks while your thighs chafe into oblivion. And the one thing that never changes, no matter the season, your clothes still itch, your food is still terrible, and your next job still waiting. Welcome to climate control, medieval style. There is none. Feeling thirsty? Need to freshen up? Want to splash a little water on your face to wake up from this damp fever dream of a life? Too bad. In medieval times, water isn't your friend. It's trying to murder you quietly. Let's start with drinking. The nearby stream looks fresh, bubbling, and clear, like something out of a fantasy movie. But spoiler alert, it's not. Upstream, someone just dumped a chamber pot into it. And if not that, then a dead pig is probably decomposing in it. Parasites, bacteria, and the entire microbial army of medieval Europe awaiting in every sip. That's why people drank beer. Yes, beer, even children. But before you imagine medieval kids doing keg stands, understand that it was small beer, weak in alcohol, strong in survival. Brewing boiled the water, so it was safer than whatever flowed through the town ditch. Wine was another option if you were rich enough to afford it and unconcerned with functioning properly before noon. What about bathing? Surely water was used for cleaning. In theory, yes. In practice, absolutely not. See, back then, people believed bathing actually opened your pores and let the disease in. That's right. Washing yourself was considered medically risky. You were cleaner, apparently, if you never removed the protective layer of filth caked onto your skin. Communal bathhouses did exist, but they quickly gained reputations as places for gossip, scandal, and sometimes full-on medieval extracurriculars. So naturally, the church got involved and shut many down. Even if you did want to bathe, it was a full production. You'd need to fetch water from the well, boil it over a fire, fill a wooden tub that leaked, and then pray no one else in the house used it before you, or worse, after. And rainwater collected in open barrels where birds poop, insects breed, and moss thrives. Sounds refreshing, doesn't it? So whether it's going in your mouth, on your body, or onto your crops, water in the Middle Ages is less of a life source and more of a gamble. One wrong gulp and you're spending your final days sweating in a straw bed, clutching your stomach and contemplating all your life choices. Next time you sip tap water, raise a glass for our ancestors. They didn't have the luxury of hydration without hazard, so you drank the water. Or maybe you didn't. Maybe you just stubbed your toe on a rock shaped like disappointment. Either way, you're sick. You need help. You need a doctor. Too bad you live in the Middle Ages where medicine is really just polite torture with a theology degree. Let's start with the diagnosis. Everything wrong with you, whether it's a cough, rash, broken bone, or the creeping plague, is caused by your humors being out of balance. The 4 humors were blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. According to medieval science, your health depends on keeping them balanced, like some sort of internal soup. Got a fever? Too much blood? The answer? Bloodletting. That's right. Let's drain your life force into a bowl using a dull blade or a hungry leech. And yes, barbers were often the ones doing it. Imagine getting a haircut and a hemoglobin extraction in one sitting. 2 for 1, baby. Feeling sad or anxious, that's clearly an excess of black bile. The cure? Laxatives. Maybe a warm herbal purge or just prayers and a cold compress while everyone avoids eye contact with you and starts carving your coffin. Now, if you break a bone or get a nasty wound, you're in real trouble. There's no anesthesia unless you count passing out from pain. Surgery is done with knives that haven't been cleaned since the Crusades. Tools are heated over fire, not for sterilization, but because they just look scarier that way. Antibiotics centuries away. Germ theory not invented yet. They think disease comes from bad air or God being annoyed with your moral failings. Got a stomachache? Must have been your sinful thoughts. Hope you like confessing while vomiting. If your condition gets worse, you'll be treated with more leeches, possibly some crushed beetles, and a priest at your bedside giving last rites just in case. At this point, they're preparing for the cure known as death. And if by some miracle you recover, everyone just assumes God took pity on you. The doctor takes full credit, and the leech gets promoted. So yes, in the Middle Ages, medicine is less about healing and more about surviving the cure. After a long day of labor, lice, and leeches, it's finally time to eat. You shuffle back to your HVEL, stomach,
growling, ready for the one joy left in life, a warm meal. Bad news. Your meal is probably trying to kill you. Let's begin with the basics. Food preservation doesn't really exist. There's no fridge, no freezer, just salt, smoke, or the hope that winter air keeps things fresh. Your meat, if you're lucky enough to have any, has been hanging for days, covered in flies, marinated in questionable brine, and possibly shared with a rat or 2. Bread is the cornerstone of the medieval diet, but even that isn't safe. In bad harvest years, desperate peasants bulk it up with bark, sawdust, or even clay to make it stretch. And if it's rice season, there's a bonus. Ergot, a fungus that causes convulsions, hallucinations, and sometimes death. It's like eating bread laced with LSD and tetanus. Vegetables, only if they're in season. And you know what's always in season? Turnips. So many turnips. Boiled, mashed, or floating in pottage. Which, if you remember from chapter 3, is basically a hot swamp of mystery ingredients that's been simmering since your great-grandfather's funeral. Fruit might be available in the fall, but it rots quickly, and sugar is rare, expensive, and hoarded by the rich to show off their blackened teeth. Dairy is another gamble. Fresh milk spoils in hours. Butter and cheese fare better, but they're loaded with bacteria. People eat them anyway because frankly it's either that or chew your Buddha leather. And let's talk about seasoning. Spices like pepper, cinnamon, or nutmeg, worth more than gold. For the average peasant, flavor comes from onions, salt if you're lucky, and pain. Most meals taste like wet burlap sprinkled with sadness. But food isn't just a health hazard. It's a political one. Game animals belong to the Lord, not you. Caught poaching a rabbit, you could be fined, imprisoned, or even executed. That's right. Your dinner could get you hanged. So, as you sit down to eat your gray stew by flickering firelight, remember every bite is a risk. But you eat anyway. Because in the Middle Ages, food doesn't nourish. It tests you. It's evening now. You've worked, suffered, and barely digested your suspicious stew. You might think the day is winding down, but don't get too relaxed because God is watching. So is the priest, and so is your neighbor Agnes, who will absolutely rat you out if you miss Mass. In medieval Europe, religion isn't just part of life. It is life. The church controls your calendar, your laws, your education if you can read, your birth, marriage, death, and everything in between. Think of it as your spiritual landlord. And you're always behind on rent. Every day is structured around prayer bells. The town church bell rings in the morning, noon, and night. Not because people need reminders, but because missing prayer is a sin. Forget to bow. Sin. Eat meat on a Friday. Sin. Think about your neighbor's wife in that one dream. Double sin. And yes, hell is very real. Vividly real. Priests describe it in glorious detail. Rivers of fire, lakes of boiling blood, demons with pitchforks, and eternal wailing. If the plague doesn't scare you, eternal damnation definitely will. You can't read the Bible yourself because it's written in Latin, a language reserved for monks, clergy, and that one noble kid who's too good for dirt. You rely on the church to interpret everything for you. That means if the priest says your crop failure is because you didn't pray hard enough, well, time to kneel harder. Tithes, a tenth of everything you own, are mandatory. If you grow wheat, you give wheat. If you raise chickens, you give eggs. If you have nothing, congratulations. You're spiritually bankrupt and financially doomed. Holidays, they're holy days. Dozens of them. And while they offer breaks from labor, they're not for fun. Therefore, attending Mass, fasting, confessing sins, and reminding yourself that joy is a dangerous indulgence. Questioning the church is dangerous. Heretics are burned. Witches are drowned. Blasphemers are flogged. And skeptics are quickly reformed. So you go through the motions. You chant. You bow. You pray that your soul, after enduring this dirt-covered life, might finally land in paradise, assuming the priest likes you. Because in the Middle Ages, God may be merciful, but the church, not so much. If you thought being a medieval peasant was rough, try doing it as a woman. All the filth, famine, and fear, plus childbirth, subservience, and social invisibility. In the Middle Ages, being a woman is like being on hard mode, with no health potions and no restart button. From birth, a girl's life path is pretty much locked in. Marry young, bear children, serve your husband, die tired. Education, not likely. Unless you're from a noble family and sent to a convent, your intellectual development stops around the time you learn how to churn butter and patch a tunic. Marriage happens early. Really early. It's not weird to be betrothed at 12 and pregnant by 14. It's not about love. It's about land, livestock, and alliances. You're Opinion not required. Once married, you're basically your husband's property. Your job is to produce heirs, feed everyone, keep the house running, and not complain. Because complaining might get you branded a nag or worse, a witch. That label comes with a complimentary drowning or burning, depending on local fashion. Childbirth is a death lottery. There's no prenatal care, no sterile tools, no anesthesia. Midwives do their best, but even minor complications can mean death for the mother, the child, or both. Some women survive 10 pregnancies. Many don't survive 2. But don't worry, once the baby is out, your work increases. Now you have a screaming infant in a lice-ridden hut, and you're expected to nurse, cook, clean, and still help in the fields. You don't get a break. You are the break for everyone else. If you're unmarried, you're suspicious. If you're widowed, vulnerable. If you're outspoken, dangerous. Women who didn't conform were often accused of witchcraft, especially if they had herbal knowledge, a strong personality, or just looked at someone funny on a rainy Tuesday. Even in the church, your role is limited. Nuns lived under strict rules. No speaking without permission, no freedom of movement, and your spiritual worth. Always ranked below men. In short, if you're a woman in the Middle Ages, you're expected to endure, obey, reproduce, and suffer in silence, ideally while smiling. Because even in a time of universal suffering, women were somehow expected to suffer. Gracefully. So far, you've battled filth, starvation, social injustice, and possibly a goat. But just when you think your day can't get any worse, here comes violence. Loud, bloody, and often completely acceptable by medieval standards. Let's be clear, the Middle Ages were not peaceful. The idea of law and order mostly meant hope the local lord isn't in a bad mood. Violence is everywhere. In the home, in the streets, on the battlefield, in church disputes, and sometimes in line at the communal. Bread oven, crime is common, punishment is brutal, and justice is more performance art than protection. Steal a loaf of bread, you could lose a hand, accused of lying, your tongue might get pierced, gossip too much, meet the scold's bridle, a metal mask strapped to your head with a bar in your mouth. For correction, of course. Let's say you're accused of something serious. Heresy, theft, witchcraft. How do you prove your innocence? By being tortured, obviously. Welcome to trial by ordeal. One version. You stick your hand in boiling water to retrieve a stone. If it heals without infection in 3 days, you're innocent. If not, you're guilty. Another option. You're tossed into a river. If you sink, you're innocent and probably dead. If you float, you're guilty and will be punished anyway. It's like a medieval game show where the prize is survival and the host is actively rooting against you. And if you're sentenced to death, that's a public event. Executions are performed in front of cheering crowds. Hangings, beheadings, burnings. Sometimes people bring snacks. It's the medieval equivalent of cable TV. Domestic violence, completely normal. Husbands were allowed, even expected, to discipline their wives and children. Street fights commonplace. You could be beaten just for looking the wrong way at a noble's horse. And war always simmering. Local feuds, territorial disputes, religious crusades. Someone's always marching off to stab someone else in the name of honor, God, or boredom. Violence isn't a breakdown of society in the Middle Ages. It is society. Everyone lives with the constant knowledge that life is fragile, justice is arbitrary, and your neighbor might bash your head in over a pig. So, walk carefully, keep your eyes down, and never trust anyone with a club. At this point, you've made it through the lice, the leeches, the laundryless misery, and the looming threat of public disembowelment. But now comes the final chapter of most medieval lives, an early and unglamorous death. If you're alive, and still breathing past the age of 40, you're practically a celebrity. You might even be referred to as the Old One, which is less of a nickname and more of a statistical miracle. Let's break it down. The average life expectancy hovers around 30-40 years, but that number is dragged down heavily by infant mortality. Nearly half of all children died before reaching age 5. Disease, malnutrition, or one bad winter was all it took. No vaccines, no antibiotics, no hope. If you survived childhood, you entered adulthood already exhausted. Work began as soon as you could walk upright, and by 25, your joints creaked like a monastery door. You might be missing several teeth, a finger, and most of your original optimism. Women faced a particularly deadly gauntlet, childbirth. It was one of the leading causes of death for medieval women. No pain relief, no medical intervention, just prayer, hot water, and someone holding your hand while you bled out on a straw-stuffed cot. For men, the dangers were different, but equally relentless. Farming accidents, infections from minor wounds, a neighbor's drunken rage, a crusade gone sideways. Even walking to the market could be risky if you crossed paths with a bored bandit or an angry tax collector. Death could also come quietly from the plague, which turned cities into cemeteries overnight, or from famine, which could last entire seasons, thinning out entire villages, or from bad luck, like eating spoiled grain and spending your final hours hallucinating and screaming at the walls. And funerals, you were lucky if you got one. Bodies were often buried quickly to avoid disease. No embalming, no polished coffins, just a hole, a few murmured prayers, and a shallow mound of earth, if there was enough space left in the churchyard. So yes, in medieval times, life was brutal, short, and constantly under siege by death in all its casual forms. You didn't retire. You just stopped showing up. And speaking of exits, let's move on to your final chapter. The medieval dream dies. So, how's your day been? You've woken up in filth, relieved yourself into a bucket, brushed your teeth with wishful thinking, nearly passed out from hunger, worked until your spine cried for mercy, scratched your way through itchy wool, prayed to not get plague, and barely dodged a public execution for owning a squirrel. Welcome to a single day in medieval Europe. Still dreaming of becoming a knight? Think again. That romanticized version of the Middle Ages. Gallant swordsmen, noble ladies in towers, heroic battles and feasts in candle-lit great halls. It's a myth polished by fairy tales and fantasy books. In truth, the medieval world was gritty, cruel, and deeply unfair. Hierarchy was everything. If you were born poor, you stayed poor. If you were born rich, congratulations. You had a better chance of surviving. But you were still one bad soup away from dysentery and a hasty burial. Even the nobles weren't immune to misery. Castles were drafty stone refrigerators filled with fleas, smoke, and politically motivated marriages. Sure, you had a fur cloak and a goblet of wine, but also a 50% chance of dying in a skirmish or from an infected splinter. Not exactly luxury. The simpler times weren't simple. They were relentless. Everything took longer. Everything hurt more. Everything from childbirth to chewing came with consequences. Life was survival, not leisure. And if you did find a quiet moment to think, to dream, to imagine something better, there wasn't much you could do with it. No upward mobility, no. Modern medicine, no internet to Google. What's this weird rash? You lived, suffered, worked, and died within a 10 miles radius of where you were born. But here's the wildest part. Through all of this, people still laughed, sang songs, told stories, fell in love, and found meaning. Not because life was easy, but because humans are stubborn like that. Even in the darkest chapters, they made space for light. So tonight, when you slip into your clean bed with indoor plumbing, antibiotics, and central heating, maybe, say a quiet thank you to the modern world and to your ancestors who fought rats, famine, and feudalism so you wouldn't have to. Long before she was Catherine the Great, Empress of all Russia, mistress of reform, and icon of ambition, she was simply Sophie. Born Sophie Federica Augusta von Anhalt in 1729. She was the daughter of a relatively obscure German princely family. Her tiny duchy in Pomerania offered little in terms of power. But Sophie herself, she had something no title could provide. Razor-sharp intelligence, relentless charm, and a quiet, burning hunger for greatness. Her upbringing was strict. Her mother, Johanna, was cold and calculating, not a warm, nurturing figure, but a social climber obsessed with status. Sophie's father, a Prussian officer, was more distant than disciplinary. From a young age, Sophie learned to walk the fine line between obedience and cunning. She read voraciously, spoke multiple languages, and learned how to observe a room before speaking in it. Skills that would soon become survival tools in one of Europe's most brutal courts. When the Russian Empress Elizabeth Petrovna began searching for a wife for her heir, Grand Duke Peter, she looked beyond Russia's borders. Peter himself was of German descent, and Empress Elizabeth believed a foreign bride, pliable and grateful, would be easier to control. Sophie fit the bill perfectly. Noble blood, Lutheran faith, which she'd be forced to abandon, and a reputation for both grace and humility. At just 14 years old, Sophie was summoned to Russia. She arrived in the freezing capital of St. Petersburg in 1744, wearing thin German fabrics and a diplomatic smile. Her mother pushed her forward like a chess piece. Sophie, however, had her own game in mind. To become acceptable in Russian society, she converted to Orthodoxy, taking the name Ekaterina Alexa Catherine. The ceremony was public, symbolic, and life-altering. She wasn't just changing religions. She was burning the bridge behind her, stepping into a foreign empire with no way. Her trimmed coat could have predicted what would come next: betrayal, revolution, enlightenment, and empire. But from the moment Sophie stepped foot in the Russian court, she stopped being a pawn and began planning how to become a queen. Catherine's marriage to Grand Duke Peter was meant to secure her place in Russian royalty. But from the very beginning, it felt more like a cage than a crown. Peter, heir to the Russian throne, was not the dashing prince of fairy tales. Awkward, immature, and obsessed. With toy soldiers, he was far more interested in playing war games in his chambers than governing an empire or showing affection to his new wife. Some accounts even suggest he refused to consummate the marriage for years. He idolized Frederick the Great of Prussia and resented the Russian court that had adopted him. In contrast, Catherine embraced Russia with a fierce determination. She learned the language, studied its history, and memorized Orthodox rituals. She wanted to belong. Peter wanted to escape. This mismatch wasn't just emotional. It was political. The Russian court was a viper's nest of gossip, paranoia, and brutal power games. Empress Elizabeth still ruled with absolute authority, but her health was in decline. Everyone knew a transition was coming, and everyone had an agenda. Catherine was watched constantly. Her letters were read, her friendships monitored, and her every move scrutinized. She couldn't trust her husband, her mother, who was still whispering in her ear on behalf of foreign interests or even her servants. In this world, alliances could turn into accusations overnight. But Catherine was no fool. She learned to play the court's games quietly, cultivating allies in the shadows. She charmed military officers, made friends with scholars, and developed a reputation for dignity and restraint, a stark contrast to her husband's childish tantrums and open contempt for Russian traditions. Behind closed doors, Catherine began reading Enlightenment thinkers like Voltaire and Montesquieu. While others saw her as a young consort, she was building a vision, not just for herself, but for Russia, a nation of strength, education, and reason. But there was one problem. The longer Peter lived, the longer Catherine remained in limbo, a powerless wife to a man unfit to rule. So she waited, observed, and planned. She knew the Russian throne wouldn't be inherited. It would have to be taken. In 1762, after nearly 2 decades of waiting, watching, and quietly maneuvering, Catherine saw her moment and seized it with breathtaking precision. Empress Elizabeth had died, and Peter, now Peter III, was finally Tsar. But his reign began unraveling almost immediately. In just a few short months, Peter alienated the church, offended the nobility, insulted the army, and lavished praise on Prussia, Russia's longtime enemy. He reversed key policies, humiliated the clergy, and talked openly about divorcing Catherine to marry his mistress. The court, already wary of his erratic behavior, turned cold. The army, filled with generals loyal to Catherine, grumbled in corridors. Even ordinary Russians, devout and patriotic, saw Peter as a foreign puppet who mocked their traditions. Catherine, watching all of this unfold, made her move. In July of that same year, while Peter was away at his summer palace, Catherine launched a bloodless coup d'etat. Supported by key military officers, including her lover, Gregory Olaf, and his influential brothers, she rode through St. Petersburg in full regalia, was proclaimed Empress Catherine II, and won the allegiance of the powerful imperial guard. Peter caught off guard, and without allies surrendered within days. He was taken into custody and shortly after found dead under mysterious circumstances. Officially, it was reported as a hemorrhoidal colic. Unofficially, it was murder. Catherine was now empress. Not by birth, not by marriage, but by will, wit, and audacity. It was unprecedented. A foreign-born woman with no legitimate claim had taken the Russian throne without a single battle. But her real challenge was just beginning. She had to transform that bold grab for power into a lasting legacy. Would Russia accept her? Would the nobility respect her? Could she hold the empire together without falling victim to the same fate as her husband? Catherine understood that power gained through intrigue could be lost just as easily. She needed to rule not as a schemer, but as a visionary. And so began her transformation from a careful conspirator to a reforming empress. One who would redraw borders, embrace the Enlightenment, and redefine what it meant to be a woman in power. Once Catherine had the crown, she could have rested on her power. But she didn't. She had something bigger in mind than simply sitting on a throne. She wanted to transform Russia. And not just militarily or politically, but intellectually. While Peter had worshipped Frederick the Great and toy soldiers, Catherine idolized Voltaire Diderot and the bold thinkers of the Enlightenment. She believed in reason, progress, education, and the role of a monarch as a servant of the people, even if she herself ruled with absolute authority. Catherine didn't just read Enlightenment philosophy. She lived it. She corresponded directly with Voltaire for over 15 years, flattering him while defending her autocracy. She invited Diderot to her court and even purchased his entire library to support him financially. Behind closed doors, she pored over legal texts, debated reforms, and crafted policies to modernize the empire. Her early reign was filled with efforts to codify Russian law. She formed the Legislative Commission in 1767, an ambitious project intended to rewrite the entire legal code of Russia. Catherine's own Nikasas, or instruction, was a political manifesto in disguise, one that spoke of equality before the law, the dangers of torture, and the responsibility of rulers to serve the common good. For an empress in 18th century Russia, it was radical. But Enlightenment ideals had to survive the realities of Russia, a vast, feudal, deeply conservative land ruled by nobles who liked their serfs exactly where they were, beneath them. Catherine knew this. While she advocated reform, she moved carefully. She abolished some forms of torture, expanded access to secular education, and built schools and libraries. But she also reaffirmed the nobility's control over their serfs to keep them loyal. This was Catherine's balancing act. A philosopher queen in public, a practical empress in private. She walked a tightrope between ideology and survival, between the shining salons of Paris and the gritty politics of Moscow. Her vision for Russia was bold, but always calculated. In many ways, Catherine wasn't trying to make Russia European. She was trying to make Russia modern on her terms. And that meant reform, yes, but with an iron hand and a velvet glove. Catherine wasn't content with reforming Russia from within. She wanted to expand it outward to make it an empire worthy of fear, admiration, and envy. Where Peter the Great had opened a window to the west, Catherine aimed to knock down the walls. Under her leadership, Russia's borders stretched wider than ever before. She waged wars not just to defend her crown, but to reshape the map of Europe. One of her most significant campaigns was against the Ottoman Empire. These wars, fought in waves throughout the 1760s and 1770s, weren't just about territory. They were about influence. Catherine saw herself as the liberator of Orthodox Christians living under Muslim rule and as the rightful protector of leadership, Russia's borders stretched wider than ever before. She waged wars not just to defend her crown, but to reshape the map of Europe. One of her most significant campaigns was against the Ottoman Empire. These wars, fought in waves throughout the 1760s and 1770s, weren't just about territory. They were about influence. Catherine saw herself as the liberator of Orthodox Christians living under Muslim rule and as the rightful protector of Eastern Europe. Under generals like Alexander Suvorov and Gregory Pumpkin, Russia captured key regions including Crimea, the northern coast of the Black Sea, and access to warm water ports, something Russian czars had coveted for generations. These victories weren't just military, they were symbolic. With each conquest, Catherine sent a message. Russia was no longer the distant backward cousin of Europe. It was a continental force. She also turned her gaze westward. In a series of deals and diplomatic maneuvers, Catherine participated in the partitions of Poland, carving up the struggling Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth along with Austria and Prussia. By the end of the Third Partition in 1795, Poland was erased from the map and Russia claimed vast new lands and millions of new subjects. But Catherine didn't just conquer with armies. She also colonized with ideas. New cities were built. Trade routes were expanded. German settlers were invited to cultivate Russian farmland. The empire became a mosaic from the icy Baltic to the sun-drenched shores of the Black Sea. And through it all, Catherine remained the central force, reading reports, issuing orders, and personally overseeing the shape of her expanding empire. Critics would accuse her of being power-hungry, even imperialistic. But to Catherine, expansion wasn't ambition. It was destiny. A great ruler, she believed, was measured not just by ideas, but by borders. She didn't just want to rule Russia. She wanted to remake it as a civilized empire, feared by its enemies, respected by its peers, and loyal to her. Alone. For all her brilliance and power, Catherine the Great was just as famous for what went on behind palace doors. And no, not all of it was whispered in libraries. Catherine's private life became one of the most talked about aspects of her reign. She had lovers, not just one or two, but a carefully curated parade of them, many decades younger, often handsome, and sometimes politically influential. She didn't hide them. In fact, she often rewarded them with titles, estates, and pensions if they behaved well. If not, they were quietly dismissed, sometimes with a polite thank you and a promotion. Among the most important of these lovers was Gregory Pumpkin, a man as brilliant as he was bold. Their relationship blurred the lines between romance, politics, and partnership. Some historians believe they may have even married in secret. Together, they shaped military campaigns, colonization projects, and the transformation of southern Russia. Pumpkin wasn't just a lover. He was her co-ruler in many ways. Still, Europe couldn't look past the scandal. Gossip swirled. Satirical pamphlets painted her as lustful, insatiable, even unhinged. And after her death, the rumors only got worse. The most infamous being the completely false and grotesque tale involving a horse spread by her enemies to smear her legacy. But why the obsession? Simple. Catherine was a woman who wielded power unapologetically. And in a world where female rulers were expected to be either saintly virgins or tragic figures, she refused to play the role. She lived, loved, and ruled on her own terms, and that made her dangerous. Ironically, while her critics painted her as immoral, Catherine herself was deeply philosophical about love and sexuality. She believed pleasure was a natural part of life and that personal relationships didn't have to threaten public responsibility. She separated emotion from governance, a feat few male rulers managed. In reality, her liaison were often strategic. She surrounded herself with men who were loyal, capable, and politically useful. And when they ceased to be, she let them go, usually with a smile and a generous retirement. Catherine's love life didn't weaken her rule. It was part of her strategy. a blend of passion and power that made her unforgettable, envied, and feared. For all her charisma and control, Catherine's reign was not without peril. And in 1773, that peril came in the form of a bearded Cossack named Ilan Pugachev. He was no ordinary rebel. Pugachev claimed to be none other than Peter III, Catherine's dead husband. According to him, he had survived the coup and now returned to reclaim the throne from the German usurper. It was absurd. Peter was long gone. But to Russia's oppressed and exhausted lower classes, the claim didn't need to be true. It just needed to offer hope. Pugachev promised liberation, an end to serfdom, lower taxes, and land for the common people. His words lit a fire across the Volga River region, especially among Cossack peasants and old believers. In a time when the gap between nobles and serfs had widened brutally, his promises sounded like salvation. The Pugachev rebellion became the largest peasant uprising in Russian history. Towns were taken, fortresses fell, nobles were slaughtered. For a terrifying moment, it seemed as if the empire itself might fracture. Catherine was shaken. This wasn't a foreign war she could win with cavalry and treaties. This was a revolt from within her own people, rising against the system. She ruled, but Catherine didn't panic. She acted. She dispatched professional military forces to crush the rebellion ruthlessly. Pugachev's forces were defeated in 1774. He was captured, displayed in an iron cage, and eventually beheaded in Moscow, a public warning to all who dared follow. Afterward, Catherine doubled down on order and control. Her dreams of liberating the serfs quietly faded into silence. The rebellion had shown her the limits of enlightenment in a country still shackled by feudalism. She now leaned harder on the nobility, who offered loyalty in exchange for absolute control over their serfs. This was a turning point. The empress who once quoted Voltaire now prioritized stability over philosophy. Reform became cautious. Surveillance increased. Rebellion, even whispered, was to be stomped out before it had breath. Pugachev may have lost his head, but he left behind a warning that haunted Catherine. That power built on inequality could only hold so long before the storm came crashing through. By the time Catherine the Great approached the final years of her life, she had ruled Russia for over 3 decades, longer than any female ruler in Russian history. From the moment she seized power, she had defied expectations, reshaped her empire, and redefined what a woman and a monarch could be. Under Catherine's reign, Russia became a true European powerhouse. Its territory expanded by over 200,000 square miles, swallowing Crimea, parts of Poland, and stretches of the Black Sea coast. These weren't just military wins. They were strategic pivots, securing warm water ports and reshaping trade. But her legacy wasn't only drawn on maps. Catherine left a cultural mark as well. She helped found the Hermitage Museum, amassed one of the greatest art collections in Europe, and corresponded with the greatest minds of the Enlightenment. Her court became a center of sophistication, art, and intellectual ambition. In a country often viewed as backward by Western Europeans, Catherine put Russia firmly on the cultural map. She modernized education, founding schools for girls, and promoted the printing of books. She introduced smallpox inoculation to Russia, even publicly receiving the vaccine herself, an act of scientific bravery in her time. Yet, her reign was also one of contradictions. While she admired Enlightenment ideals, she never freed the serfs. In fact, she extended serfdom deeper into Russia's territories. Her reforms, while impressive, remained mostly top-down, designed to polish the empire without truly transforming its foundations. Still, Catherine's rule brought stability and ambition. She understood that power was not inherited. It was crafted, managed, and constantly defended. She ruled not by divine right, but by force of will, political brilliance, and relentless calculation. She was called many things: a user, a tyrant, a reformer, a seductress. But above all, she was effective. When she died in 1796, Russia was wealthier, larger, and more formidable than it had been in centuries. She left behind a throne secure, an empire expanded, and a legend that would endure for centuries. Catherine didn't just reign. She ruled with intellect, strategy, and an unapologetic grip on history. And in doing so, she became more than an empress. She became a myth. For all her power, expansion, and enduring legacy, Catherine the Great was still at her core a woman navigating a man's world and reshaping it in her image. Behind the imperial portraits and state decrees was someone deeply aware of how precarious her position was. She was not born Russian. She came to the throne through a coup. She ruled an empire that didn't want a woman in charge. And yet, she not only endured, she thrived. Catherine was never content to be ornamental. She read constantly, wrote endlessly, and never stopped learning. Her daily schedule was intense. Hours of reading reports, corresponding with foreign powers, editing state papers, and managing a court filled with rival factions. She wasn't content to simply sit on the throne. She worked the throne like a stateswoman born to it. She was also, in many ways, lonely. She surrounded herself with courtiers, lovers, and artists, yet wrote in her memoirs of how few people she could truly trust. Her son Paul, whom she distrusted and kept away from state matters, grew into a man she feared would undo all her progress. Her greatest emotional partnership with Gregory Pumpkin faded into deep friendship, but his death in 1791 left a wound that never truly healed. Catherine crafted her image carefully. She understood the power of narrative and wielded it better than most monarchs of her age. She posed as Mother of Russia, enlightened monarch, warrior, empress, and lover of the arts. But beneath those roles was a woman who had endured rejection, betrayal, scandal, and rebellion and kept going. When she died in 1796, she left behind an empire transformed, but also questions. Could she have done more to end serfdom? Were her Enlightenment ideals compromised by politics? Was she more reformer or ruler? History remembers her by the title she never gave herself, the Great. It wasn't because she was flawless or kind or just. It was because she took power and wielded it on her own terms in a time and place where women weren't supposed to have any. She didn't just wear the crown. She rewrote what it meant to deserve one. In the humid depths of the Chiapas jungle in southern Mexico, the ruins of Palenque whisper stories from the ancient Maya world. Towering temples rise above the canopy, their limestone faces eroded by time, but still brimming with secrets. And in 1994, one of those secrets revealed itself. A team of Mexican archaeologists led by Fanny Lopez Jimenez was surveying Temple 3, a relatively modest pyramid next to the more famous Temple of the Inscriptions, the burial site of the mighty King PL the Great. Temple the Throne wasn't expected to hold much until they noticed something odd. A sealed hidden chamber beneath the structure. No looters had touched it. It was pristine. When the archaeologists broke through and lowered themselves inside, they found a stone sarcophagus.